Welcome, everyone, to San Bernardino Valley Presents Watershed Moments, a podcast where we talk about the resource investments, innovation, and inspiration within our water community. Today, I'll be speaking with Adán Ortega, Chairman of the Board for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Executive Director of the California Association of Mutual Water Companies, also known as Cal Mutual. So let's get started. Thank you, Adán, for joining us in our podcast presented by San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, your fellow state water contractor. Adán Ortega, the chairman of the board for Metropolitan Water Agency and the executive director and co-founder of the Cal Mutual group. And I'm so excited to have you here and talk water. Thank you for joining me, Adán.
Great to be here, Heather. It's always good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you. And I know we love to talk about water and California infrastructure and so many of the challenges that we face today. And so I'm happy to have this conversation out there. And I hope that our audience learns a little bit and becomes inspired to be more involved in California water issues. So let's get started. First, I love to hear people's background because I'm always interested in where did you come from? How were you raised? How did you become so passionate about this issue? Because it's a little bit kind of, outside of what I would consider mainstream conversation. So how did you get into water? Tell us your origin story, Adán.
Well, the first thing I ever did in water was working with the group that eventually became the Farm Water Coalition. If you go back to 1988, when the Miller-Bradley bill came up in Congress to allow for water transfers, there were all these signs along Highway 99 going up through the Central Valley saying no water, no food. And at the time, I worked for a government relations firm and political consulting firm that advocated for agriculture. So that was the first time I worked on a water issue, is with a group that later became the Farm Water Coalition, advocating to save agriculture from urban areas that wanted to take their water. Later, I ended up working with Central and West Basin and I became assistant general manager. These Central and West Basin municipal water districts are member agencies of Metropolitan Water District. And so I got my first deep dive there. And then from there, I worked for Bill Jones, another ag figure. He was Secretary of State at the time. Governor Wilson called him the Secretary for Water. And of course, he loaned me out to do Bay Delta issues. And I took a deep dive there in learning what was happening and trying to secure the levees in the Bay Delta area and to fund those remedies through the federal government. And I ended up lobbying quite a bit to try to get the federal government to pay their fair share. And then from there, I came to Metropolitan Water District, where I was head of external affairs. I headed the government relations and our offices in Washington and Sacramento. Did a lot of strategic planning with the then general manager, Ron Gastelum, who was my boss. And I was there until I left. And I left, started my own consulting firm. One of the early things we did was to create the California Association of Mutual Water Companies. So I have this distinction of representing the smallest water systems in California at the same time that I'm involved with the largest. I represent the city of San Fernando, which itself is a severely disadvantaged community. They are 4 square miles, and they're very proud because surrounded by the city of Los Angeles, they've managed to have their own water department and their own police department, and I'm very proud to represent them. So I hope that summarizes it well enough.
Well, that's a great origin story that I just want to go back to. How you became involved in this critical issue was by seeing literal signs on the side of the road announcing the importance of water, which if people don't drive the I-5 corridor north or south, you don't see those signs very often. And it just makes me want to ask you, do you think that we should have more presence in terms of visibility of the importance of a reliable water supply out there in, all parts of California? Because I can picture those signs exactly because I happen to drive to Washington every summer. But if you don't see those, it's like you forget about how important water is and that it takes effort to have that.
Well, I want to congratulate you because I think you're the first general manager at San Bernardino Muni that has a communications department to do exactly what you just stated. I think that for most of its history, the water community, with some exceptions in time, have been wanting to be left alone. And
Mhm.
so there hasn't been a lot of effort to communicate. And then we have some very delicate issues that we've shied away from. Manny Teodoro has a book that talks about how water agencies led the way in growing public distrust of government, that of confidence in tap water, that people don't trust their tap water, is a symptom of the lack of trust in government. And I think it's time that we all join people like yourself who were saying, no, this must change. We need to be advocates. We need to be out there talking about something that people take for granted before it's too late. This morning, for example, I was reading the paper about in the LA Times how the energy industry is going through a crisis on rates. How are we going to pay for the infrastructure of power? And it's now being debated in the public forum. In water, we still have an opportunity as leaders to be the masters of our own destiny. And I think we should take it. And it's going to take communications to do that.
I totally agree. And you're right. I think I am the first GM to have a strong communications department. And now we're doing a podcast to talk about these things. But so have you lived in a place where water wasn't a given ever or traveled to those kinds of places? Do you have that kind of perspective in your background?
I do. I grew up visiting my grandmother in Mexico, and in northern Mexico, where they used to shut the whole water system off during part of the day. And, we would be waiting with buckets in order to fill all the buckets we had, plus a small cistern so that we could get, through the evening when there was no water pressure in the system. And so I got to see that firsthand. I kind of took it for granted. I thought that that was the way it was in most poor places and that such places didn't exist in California, where I grew up. But later in my work, early in my career in the Central Valley, I did run to places where there is a lack of safe drinking water. And it extended not only to the Central Valley. I grew up in East Los Angeles, and there's places in Southeast Los Angeles that have had issues with manganese and things that affect the color and the taste of water. So, yeah, it's been something that I've always been present around, and trying to help these small water systems has been a major part of my career since leaving Metropolitan.
Yeah, I went on a trip to Guatemala when I was in college and I spent a month living with a family. And I remember the first day that I heard the water truck coming to fill up the cistern on top of the house that the entire family shares for a week or 2 weeks. And just that really very finite understanding of a water supply in terms of this amount of water has to last for an entire week or 2 weeks. And that was really eye-opening coming from, at that time I lived in Louisiana, where they have so much water they don't know what to do with it at times. But it just was like really tangible. And I started thinking at that time about what is a water system, or how do we deliver water? And I think that's one of our challenges in especially in California, is trying to convey the magnitude of the planning that is needed for a reliable water supply for so many people. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, is because you're at the ends of the spectrum in terms of being the chairman of the largest water agency in the nation, and then also the executive director for Cal Mutual, which is these small water companies that are in many cases historic water rights, have been around for many, many decades. So how do you feel like the work comes together in terms of how you think about water, and what are the commonalities that you see across kind of the whole landscape of Californian water?
Well, with climate change, I think we're going to have this debate about what's better, whether having a large centralized system is the best way to serve the public, or whether to have a disaggregated system is better for managing risk, so that if one system goes down, another one is thriving. We saw that in the Altadena fire, for example, where there were four small systems, one municipal system and three mutual water companies. They did not all go down at the same time, even though they were overtaken by the firestorm. And that turned out to be a good thing because they were able to have water a little longer than they might have if they had all been intertied into one system. So you can make that argument, but on the other hand, the economies of scale bring great benefits, as we saw with the city of Los Angeles, where Metropolitan was able to back them up as they had reduced pressure in their fire hydrants. And it doesn't get in the news a lot, but the fact is that the city was able to recover fairly fast, given what's happened in other places. Now, when it comes to the differences between the large systems and the smaller water systems that don't have safe drinking water year round, forget the fires, I think we have a major flaw in the discourse in California in that the small water systems and these communities get treated like a charity. And I'm one who doesn't believe that the human right to water is a charity or ought to be treated as a charity. Californians, we're not static. We may live in one of your communities where there's safe drinking water, or in one of our communities in Southern California that Metropolitan covers. But if you leave your home and drive up the Central Valley, there's a good chance that you might encounter water that isn't safe to drink. So the charitable groups, the foundations that are out there trying to do some good work will, have established what I call a platitude that we can all feel sorry for the 1 million people in California that don't have safe drinking water. When the truth is that if you're driving from one part of the state to the other, and all Californians are mobile creatures, it's actually 40 million people that don't have the guarantee of access for safe drinking water in California. And as soon as we can break through that and have everybody realize that they all have a stake in everybody having safe drinking water, I think we'll be able to solve the problem. But so long as we're thinking about it in terms of charity, as long as we're thinking about it in terms of the limitations in our tax code for solving these issues, it'll remain a platitude, not a real conviction that everybody shares.
Oh, I totally agree. And you and I have talked about this before, but I think it's worth talking about in this medium is that one thing that drives me crazy is that people like to think of themselves as separate and not connected, and that, oh, my community has a reliable water supply, or my community has all the water that we need because we, sit on top of, let's say, an aquifer, or we have surface water rights, or, we have all the money that we need to buy water when we need it. When in reality, California is an integrated system of, taking water where it rains or where it falls and transporting it to areas where there's, huge economic drivers. And that's, could be the Central Valley through agriculture, Southern California through lots of our economic engines. But the reality is that we are all interconnected and we are interdependent because of our economy. We all pay into the Californian economy through our tax base, and we all receive some redistribution of those taxes, whether it's going to firefighting and CAL FIRE in different parts of the state, or, whatever it is that we're spending California tax dollars on. One fundamental foundation and commonality there is that we are all reliant on having enough water to get our jobs done and to support the people who do the jobs. And so, this tendency that people have to kind of separate themselves out from everyone else, I think does a disservice to the water system itself and to the Californian, vision of what we are, right? It's like people came here for a reason. And to be honest, like a lot of our history is founded on moving water from where it was falling to where it could be used. And so I think you're right in that you like to think that, oh, someone else doesn't have that clean, drinkable water. That's not my problem. But it really is. Like we all need that to support our home and our economy, which benefits all Californians. So I guess that's where the communication comes in, is like, what are your thoughts on how do we communicate that interconnectedness that we know is a reality, but a lot of people, don't understand or don't believe?
Well, I think we need to have a communications goal. And I think that many will begin by talking about something like climate change, which is a threat to us all, right? But really, when it comes to what we're going to do about it, it becomes more, again, of a slogan that doesn't really carry much weight in terms of how we're actually going to spend money. In other words, we want people to support the plans that we had before climate change by labeling it as a climate adaptation project, when in truth, we would have done it anyway. And it's the same on the environmental side. You know, the environmental community still has a whole list of projects and issues that predate the climate change era. And they would still want us to do the same thing, also sugarcoating it as climate change. So everybody in every quarter is guilty of using a topic like climate change as sugarcoating. On the other hand, I think we also have to realize that in this era, we all share a common thread. Like you've stated, we're interwoven, we're interrelated. In the pioneer days, it was easy to identify that it was in everybody's benefit to build the infrastructure, to move water to places where you could spur agriculture and economic development. But here we are in the post-pioneer days. We have a new reality, and that new reality carries the weight of the infrastructure that was already built, that we need to build upon for the future. And we forget that. And so at that point, you know, it's everybody for themselves. And I think that's a major threat. The biggest threat to the population of California and our economic prosperity isn't climate change. It's us and our political views and our limitations. We're our greatest enemies.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think I don't know if I call it a slowdown or potentially even pretty much a halt happened, maybe post 70s, I think, maybe a few projects were built in the 80s. We seem to have shifted from these big visionary projects to an idea that, like you said, it's kind of everybody for themselves. We have this beneficiary pays system of water in California, which in my view is very difficult when you have generational type infrastructure that needs to be built that the entire state of California benefits from. To put that on the local agencies is very challenging because, the ratepayers can only bear so much before you start getting to a place where, they have to choose between different parts of their budget. How do you think we got to this place where we've either, slowed down or maybe even halted in some of the large infrastructure projects that we need? I know you're planning a lot, we're planning a lot, but we're not keeping up with the pace of investment that our population needs. And why do you think that is? And how do we overcome the idea that it's impossible to build these huge projects?
Well, I think we're the victims of our own success. The truth is that the system that would provide reliable water, for example, from the State Water Project, water from Northern California has to traverse the highly unstable and deteriorating Bay Delta, which is a choke point, because it has been deteriorating for decades, and we've known it. In order for us to be able to build the large bypasses around the Delta that have been proposed over the years, we've had to demonstrate in Southern California that we weren't going to increase our reliance on it, that we were going to stabilize that very delicate estuary so that we could have a reliable source, not a greater source. And so we've become very efficient. In Southern California alone, in our most recent report to the state legislature, we reported that consumers in Southern California are using 45% less water than they did in 1990, despite the fact that we've grown by 5 million people.
Yeah.
But the folks that are stopping progress in the Bay Delta area won't give us any credit for it. In fact, what they tell us is that we need to do more at the same time that our sales are declining, and that it's becoming harder and harder, as you said, to maintain the infrastructure that we currently have and to build the projects of the future. The Bay Delta area is a very interesting area because it's a beautiful bucolic place, notwithstanding the fact that it's been highly altered through the construction of the levees over a period that began over 100 years ago. And, you know, those people are fighting like hell to maintain their lifestyle, to maintain farms that exist in an area that at any moment could be destroyed by an earthquake or by an atmospheric river. And we have failed as a region to be able not only to gain their trust, but to even educate our own constituency to understand why we need to spend the kind of money that it demands if we're going to keep California prosperous. And so I think we need to have a brutally honest conversation about growth in California and prosperity and what it's going to cost to really do it. But in the water industry, given that our cost is relatively minor as compared to things like cell phones and power and things like that, I think we have an opportunity for making our case.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of filter that a lot of people look through that sees, oh, that's too expensive. But if you really think about, you're either going to pay to invest in large water infrastructure projects, or you're going to pay in either, lost economic production or, losing population, moving to other places. Like, not having water has so many ripple effects that people don't understand that it is the foundation of everything that we do, is being able to capture and move water. And, I've done a lot of work on infrastructure projects that the modeling shows it's not that we're going to have less water in the future. It's just that it's going to fall in different patterns than it has in the past. And I always use the analogy of like the freeway system that was delivered in designed, the freeway system that was designed and built in the 70s. If we had never done any updates to the freeway system, of course it wouldn't function for our current population. Of course it wouldn't get people where they need to go in a timely manner. But we've invested over the years in this piece of infrastructure that people really understand the day-to-day value of it. And I don't think we've told that story effectively about water infrastructure because, like you said, we've always managed to have the water come out when they turn the faucet, and it's, at a reasonably affordable rate. But that begs the question, how do we give the public that value proposition that they can get behind a piece of infrastructure that is like their generations of the Hoover Dam or their generation of the California Aqueduct? How do we get that public support that, like, yeah, that's something I want to pay into?
I think you need to draw a contrast, Heather. I don't think the highway system has been successful. I was talking to a regional director of Caltrans, and he was telling me that when you see a freeway project being built today, that freeway project, that the need for the capacity that freeway project accounts for dates back 15 years.
That's probably true. I believe you on that.
And so there's a lag, and that's why no matter how much we widen the highways, we're always clogged. The true story about water that we haven't told is we've done the opposite. What we've done is by ensuring that people are doing conservation, that we've been recycling massive amounts of water. Already we lead the nation on that front, that actually people are using less water and the region is using less water. And in fact, while people are complaining that water rates might be going up, we have massive amounts of water in storage right now. And that means that we have the ability to withstand multiple years of drought without having to go into the kinds of water use reductions that could cause damage to the economy. Now, our greatest challenge this year, with only a 35% allocation from the state of California, at Metropolitan Water District, we're storing water. And in fact, for the first time, we may have everything filled in terms of our reservoir and our reservoirs and our groundwater accounts, to the point that we may be selling water to agriculture for the first time. And so we haven't gotten that word out there. We've done the opposite of what the transportation companies have done. But just like everybody else, with declining sales, we still have to find the revenue to be able to pay for the future. Last year, Metropolitan increased our property tax by 100%. And you didn't, in fact, the LA Times said that water was still a great value with that. And why is that? Well, even with that, when you look at your property tax bill, nobody looks at us because it's still under $100 a year. Think about what your house is worth. Think about what the forebears paid. We used to pay all our bills at Metropolitan Water District with the property tax. Now we pay it mostly through the sale of water. And the property tax in the 1930s and 40s and into the 50s and 60s was a larger percentage of your property value than it is now. So what is it when you're paying $65 a year to have a backup system of water that is there for any time that local resources fail or as your main supply? And look at property values today. So we're still a great bargain. We need to tell that story, and we need to stop hiding as industry leaders on those questions.
Well, I've said this to you before. I'm one of your property taxpayers, and I fully support you increasing the property tax because I agree that it is having fundamental, stable, and reliable water supply is what helps our property values be stable and increase over time. And so I'm fully willing to invest in that. And if you look at it in terms of a percentage of your property tax, it is quite low. And I am a firm believer, as we've said before, of that being kind of a way that we fund these major infrastructure projects that we know we will need in the future. Because again, this year, yes, you have, a lot of water in storage. We have a lot of water in storage as well. Last year was the first time we sold water to agricultural interests in the Central Valley because we just couldn't get it in the ground here. We had a wet year up north and a wet year down here. That said, we know there will be those drought periods in the future. And so, especially the way that Metropolitan's funding structure is set up, being heavily weighted towards water sales, those drought periods are really, really challenging. And, I believe that the more stable our infrastructure funding system is, the better for the long haul. And so, like I said, as one of your taxpayers, way to go, Metropolitan, because I do want you to invest in those large water infrastructure projects, because that's how I can make sure that my property value doesn't go down over time if you can't deliver the water. And that's a really important part of the system. The same as people move to places because they have, a good school district. You also want to make sure you have a reliable water supply. So that's kind of on the large end of the spectrum, both for, both of our agencies. Let's talk a little bit about your CalMutual agencies. So very different. How can you just explain to people who might not know a lot about the mutual water companies? How were they originally started and how are they funded?
When California was first became a state, and this predates California becoming a state, property owners would get together to build a basic irrigation system, a basic drainage system, to build wells. And the way that they paid for it was by creating what we now call a co-op. These are not-for-profit co-ops where the property owners are responsible not only for paying for the supply and the infrastructure, but for its maintenance and for everything that they need, including, for example, fire pressure. So the property owners take that responsibility. Over time, what happened is that many of these mutual water companies became consolidated because they predated many of the cities that exist today. In fact, in your service territory, you have several mutual water companies I'm very fond of. Mm-hmm. Water rights go back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo when California became part of the United States. So, that's how the mutual water companies began. There are still about 800 of them left in California. And some of them are very small. Some of them are very old. And some of them, there was a slew of mutual water companies that were founded with the housing boom after World War II, where developers didn't want to pay to annex into a municipal system. So they basically dug a well and left the residents at their own mercy. And as our regulations and our science became more advanced, it became more expensive to run them, because in order to comply with the new regulations, you have to invest in very expensive treatment systems, which is a major driver of water rates in California. And a lot of them started to fail. And so the larger mutual water companies in California, there's about 12 of them that had over 3,000 connections, which is considered large in the mutual water company world, decided that they needed to take a stand and support the smaller ones in order to have moral standing when the legislature was trying to pass legislation that affected all of them. And so Cal Mutuals began in 2013. We realized that many of these small water systems, for example, were not even insured. The Association of California Water Agencies, which represents the large water systems, threw them out. It wasn't personal. It had to do with tax issues with the IRS. And so they were out there trying to buy increasingly difficult to get insurance in the market. So we got legislative authority to start the Joint Powers Risk Insurance Management Authority, which now provides insurance. And what is different about us than private insurance, because this is a joint powers, it's semi-governmental, or what Aqua does, is we take all the residuals. This is the money that's left over from the fact that claims weren't filed, and we put it back into small water systems. So we will help the smallest water systems that have less than 500 connections do all kinds of things, like look at their bylaws, make sure that they're complying with the laws of the state, that they're submitting their financial reports. And more recently, we've been working with the Department of Water Resources to bring them up to basic drought resiliency standards with the $10 million grant that was awarded to us that we've been deploying over the last couple of years. And then, you've done a lot of great things for your agencies by giving them a backup supply that is required by law, and giving them access to state water project water when it's available. It's unprecedented, I think, what agencies like San Bernardino Muni, San Gorgonio Pass Agency, Coachella Valley Water District have done to help their small systems. We're very appreciative of that.
Well, thanks for that history, because a lot of people don't know it. And what I love about the mutuals is so I have a general manager's breakfast every couple months where I invite all the general managers of the retail agencies that we serve. And we just sit around the table, we eat some breakfast, and we talk about our challenges, solutions. And almost all of the mutuals general managers come, and we just have the most creative discussions about, a lot of us are facing the same challenges, whether you're big or small. But there's this real sense of community and banding together and trying to find solutions where we can work together. So since you brought it up, I'll talk about our big project we've been doing with one of our mutuals. So we have been working on a recharge project that is so important, along with the mutual water company in South Mesa and also San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency. And I don't know if anyone's done it in our service area before, but they came to me and said, we got this great idea. We need to help a small community to have a reliable water supply, not just for drinking water, but also for fire protection, which we all know is so important. And we can build a recharge basin, we can repurpose a pipeline. And so these three agencies, South Mesa Mutual Water Company, Pass Agency, and ourselves, we came together, we designed the project, went out with your help and got grant money to help fund this. And I think as of next year, we're going to be putting supplemental water for recharge into an aquifer that will be stored during wet years and used during dry years. A community got a new water connection. It's just a win-win-win. And that only is possible by different agencies being able to work together. And the thing I love about it is just get the egos out of the room. And let's just talk about what we can each bring to the table. And that is a project that's being celebrated, all over the state by the state board and others, by Cal Mutual and other water agencies. And it's just a good example of how we can solve some of these challenges by working together, by being innovative, by being creative, and just putting your best foot forward and being an authentic partner in something that brings tremendous value to the community.
Well, Heather, what started it all was that there was a community out there with the trailer park. They had about 200 connections, and the community was depending on a well that had high nitrate levels. Nitrates are extremely dangerous for public health. And, the state came to Dave Armstrong over at South Mesa and said, hey, can you help them out? Because the municipal system that's there was not doing very well itself in meeting safe drinking water standards. And so South Mesa stepped up. And, I think Armstrong is very fortunate to know you and Lance Eckhart and others that he was able to reach out to, because the other thing that happened is that how does a small water system, for example, take a $10 million grant from the state? And I mean, what happens is you have to spend the money first before the state reimburse you. A little system like that isn't going to have that money. And what agencies like San Gorgonio Pass Agency and you all did is to bridge the funding. And so that was incredibly helpful. It's an example for everybody in the state of how to help small water systems that need help. I think it could be an example, for example, in the Eaton Fire area where you had 3 mutual water companies that were highly damaged. In fact, our president of our board, Licia Machita Lopez, is the general manager of one of those companies. And in fact, Metropolitan's chief engineer is the president of one of those other companies. But I think that where we will look for examples on how to help those systems will come from the kinds of things that you've done. It really affords solutions that I think aren't all that evident to everybody yet.
Can you just talk about why you think these small systems and mutual water companies are still important in today's, times, especially coming from someone who runs the largest water agency in our nation, but you still passionately believe in the importance of these small local water systems. So tell us why you think they're so valuable.
In many parts of California, they're part of the community identity. In Altadena, I'll tell you that the 3 mutual water companies in Altadena were founded the same year as the city of Pasadena. City of Pasadena decided that it wanted to be a city, that it wanted to have a municipal water system. The people of Altadena are more independent at the time, and I think they still are. They have a community with a unique character. They have a very diverse community with different income levels that live side by side, and they want to be the masters of their own universe. If you want to appreciate what this meant, right after the fires happened, a council member from the city of Pasadena suggested that they ought to take over the 3 mutual water companies. You never should have said that.
I can imagine the response already.
It wasn't a very good response. And I think you find that in the more rural areas where you have people that identify and take pride in their communities. I represent not a mutual water company on the Metropolitan board, but a small city that's a lot like that. I mean, there was a major lawsuit between the city of Los Angeles, the city of Glendale, the city of Burbank, and the little city of San Fernando for the water rights in the San Fernando Basin. And the only one that won was the city of San Fernando that still retains its own rights. And it's a source of pride because they want to be able to harness their resources in the best way they can. But I think they also were smart in that they joined with the Metropolitan Water District, as a result of an earthquake that forced the hand that allowed their membership. But I think people should not discount community identity, and buyer beware if you're going to think you're going to go in there and just take them over. There's some that would like to consolidate. There's others that wouldn't, and they need to be respected individually for the communities they represent.
Yeah, I think so too. The mutual water companies that I've worked with are fiercely independent and proud of their heritage. Their water rights often go way, way back into the tapestry of California. And so if you think about the people who came out here, the pioneers, the people that, just so passionate about wanting to live a certain way and have that independence and start their, whatever farm or orchards or whatever it was that they were seeking, that dream. And the small mutual water companies are part of that story. And so I've just always found them to be really passionate about what they do, who they serve, their history. And you're right. I hear talk about people wanting to take them over, but I think that would be a loss to all of the communities. You know, as you know, and a lot of our listeners know, I'm a biologist, and so I actually look at things in an ecosystem approach. And in an ecosystem, you need species or individuals of all different types to make the whole ecosystem work. And so I think that's kind of applicable to the different types of water services available. And the mutuals, some of them might be small, some of them might have 3,000 connections. They have their place within our ecosystem of California water. And so I think it would be a terrible loss to think that just, you know, that we should just take them all over and serve water via, you know, the municipal systems, because it is something a rich part of our history. I wanted to ask you about, you talked a little bit about the Eaton Fire. And so I know that there's a big mutual water company presence, but can you also talk about a little bit about how you, as either Metropolitan or Cal Mutual, what happened during the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire in kind of that recovery and response? Like, how did you guys react and how were you able to support the efforts?
Well, we received calls from the city of Los Angeles and the three mutuals through Foothill Municipal Water District, which serves the area. They're the water importer. They're our member agency that imports water into the Altadena area, expressing distress. One of the things that Metropolitan did, for example, is we went out and we cleared brush from around a critical pumping facility near the Rose Bowl that was operated by Foothill Municipal Water District, because we needed to be able to keep at least water pressure from the imported system alive. And so that happened in the midst of the fire. The other thing that happened with the mutuals in Altadena is that they had backup generators that were operating, and you know, they were running out of fuel. And it was difficult for them, given the ongoing onslaught of this firestorm, to be able to do that. Metropolitan had its own folks out there, some contractors as well, making sure that these generators, you know, stayed fueled through as much of the fire as they could. With LADWP, you know, they ran out of the water that was pressurizing their fire hydrants, and Metropolitan helped DWP do a workaround to make sure that we could get water from a facility that we have at the Sepulveda Pass, which was right below Brentwood before you see the Getty Museum in that area, to make sure that we could get water up there as best as could be done. But just given, you know, the ferocity of that fire, it was, you know, a humongous effort that everybody, I think the water community really rallied in. Over time, for example, some of the Orange County water agencies were sending these big water trucks. You know, a lot of the residents, for example, in the Altadena area didn't want to have to depend on little bottles of water. And so they would bring their jugs, and some of these, what they call water buffaloes, were important in helping people fill these bigger jugs that they wanted to use instead of the little water bottles. So no task was too small or too big. And Metropolitan was there at the ready, you know, to help people when they needed it.
That is amazing. I love all that you guys did. That's really great. We had the line fire in the fall, and we were doing the same thing, trying to maintain water pressure, trying to make sure there was enough water in reservoirs for them to helicopter dip water out. So I think that's one thing people don't realize, is that the water agencies, you know, do act as first responders sometimes in incidents, and that it does take everybody working together to be able to address this, you know, in this instance, catastrophic wildfire. But in many of the challenges that we have, it does require us working together. So let me ask you this question. What do you think is our biggest risk to water agencies and our reliable water supply?
Well, over the long term, like I said, I think our main obstacle is us as people. You know, the mutual water companies, for example, have been having to deal with what they call cost of service limitations. You can only charge what it costs to run the system. And I think Proposition 218 is the same, operates in the same way for the larger water systems. And so what you have to do is grow what you call a general benefit. And what's breaking down in California right now is the idea that when you help one part of the state, that you're helping everybody. And we're now playing a game of chicken where if one part of the state gets something that another part of the state doesn't, you don't look at it in the ways that you described at the beginning of the podcast, which was, we're providing economic prosperity for everybody. Instead, we say, oh no, what's going to that part of the state is coming from me, from my taxpayers, without accounting for that. I think that's a huge threat. It's a huge threat to Metropolitan. What happened with us is that, from the 1980s all the way to the present, we've been subsidizing the construction of these recycled water projects, these brackish desalination projects, and these conservation programs. That means that each of our member agencies now has at stake selling water from their own system to meet their bond obligations, their loan, they have to pay back their loans. And so to many of them, up until the conservation as a way of life legislation kicked in a couple of years ago, it didn't matter if we raised our rates, because the higher our rates went, the easier it was for them to sell their water. But what comes with it is giving up your backup system. When the conservation as a way of life regulations came in saying, you got to conserve that recycled water too, then I think the discussion became more reasonable. But yet, unless we find a common definition for what I call the general benefits principle, what is it that we do that's in benefit to everybody? What's going to happen is that we're going to fall behind in our investments on our systems, and the system will fall apart. I'll give you one other example. In Mexico City last fall, they had the acero for the first time. The acero meant that the wealthiest part of Mexico City were going to be on intermittent water service, just like my grandma had in a very poor part of Mexico. That means that water service would not work through part of the day. Now, where's Mexico City's water? It's right below their feet. That's Metropolis used to be a huge lagoon. Well, where's our source of water? It's 250 miles away from the Colorado River, or 400 miles away from Northern California. A lot can go wrong in that distance. Now, I had, when we were talking about our rates, I had a taxpayer group come and visit me and say, well, surely, you can cut back on staff to hold back your water rates. You can not build as many projects as you are going to build. I said, well, I don't know. I said, it all depends on how much water, when you want your water. You want to be able to have water after an earthquake. You want to be able to have water throughout the day during a drought. Now, we can talk about spending less money. We can talk about having less people working in these remote, very desolate areas with a very harsh environment that is the Mojave Desert. But at the end of the day, if those people aren't there, something can go wrong and it could choke us off. We could have failure. So it's all a matter of risk. And I think we need to be thinking about that as something that's a benefit to all of us. Managing that risk of the environment, the risk of distance, the risk of these atmospheric rivers and unforeseen events. That's in our common interest, no matter where you are in California.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, especially as a wholesale water agency, state water contractor, is that we plan on the decadal scale, and we plan for there to be an unforeseen event, right? It's all about adaptability and resilience. And that's just not something that people are used to doing in their day-to-day. And so it's a different story and a different value proposition that we need to have is, what is the cost of water when it's not available? You can't get it. You would pay any cost, but you can't get it. And so I think that's a challenge also with retail agencies. They have a shorter time scale, maybe a more refined focus of vision. And so trying to convey that we're not thinking about 5 years from now, we're thinking about 20 years from now. If we're going to build a project that's going to deliver water in 25 years, we need to be planning it, designing it, financing it right now. And that's just a very, very different focus than I think a lot of people have.
let me interject in there. I think that there is we have all these big projects on queue. And I think there's a misimpression that it's an either or proposition between the projects, or that we have to build them all at the same time. So at Metropolitan Water District, in our member agencies, we have a whole system of local projects that are currently operating under capacity because there's not enough demand for the water coming out of these recycling plants. So when we talk about affordability, we should be looking at things like the Delta Conveyance Project. We should be looking at Sites Reservoir, and even these pure water projects that are being planned in the region over a broader time horizon. And our goal ought to be to build this endless river, and to have, for example, what I call the Hoover Dam investment of our time by the federal and the state government. When we're looking at things like Sites Reservoir, you mentioned the beneficiaries pay principle, and there's some very savvy people who have said that that the only people that benefit are the people in your agency's service area and our service area. So it drives up our costs, but they get benefits too. They would be protected from floods that could be devastating to that region. But we need to have a longer time horizon that we're planning to implement these programs so that we don't overburden our ratepayers. And I think we've had enough success in this region with conservation and recycling that we can do that. We can be really smart about how we build this infrastructure in California over the next 50 to 100 years.
I totally agree that we should look at how does not just the state benefit, but in reality, our entire nation benefits from a healthy, robust Californian economy, because we send a huge amount of tax revenue to Washington, D.C. every year, which then gets redistributed out amongst all the states. So I really believe, again, these generational investments, we need to have a strong partnership with the federal and state government in terms of funding, because the beneficiary pay system, the entire nation is benefiting from these projects, because the entire nation benefits from the state of California. So if anyone can convince the powers that be, I believe in you, Adán.
Well, I think we have two advocates. I mean, I think that, for all the politics and all of the guessing and speculation about political rivalries, I think this vision is one that both President Trump and Governor Newsom share. I think that as a team, they can come up with the vision, to build the next Hoover Dam of our time. And it's going to be different. It's not going to be a big, monumental kind of place straddling two canyons. It's going to be the kind of things that you are probably not going to be able to see very easily, like a Delta Conveyance Project that goes under Bay Delta, or a reservoir in this remote area that can help store water to improve water quality and help fish habitat. The only issue there is that the locals don't buy into it. But I think that the locals will have to reckon on their own if we don't do something on the terrible floods that threaten their areas. And so I think we need to care about them and protecting the estuary as best we can, and protecting those farms. But I think it also has to be in a way that benefits the rest of the state, so that we all benefit, like you said.
Yeah, I think that over time people will see that especially Sites Reservoir, I've seen the modeling. I am wholeheartedly supporting that project. And I believe that it's actually going to be a big benefit to the environment in the downstream and surrounding areas, because it's a very smartly designed project. So I have high hopes for kind of the legacy of that project over time. Let me ask you two more questions. So first one, what do you love about working in California water?
Well, it's not that large a community, so everybody. And then secondly, the fact that it is a leader in the nation. I think that California leads the nation and the world in finding innovative ways of providing water in a manner that has really grown the economy. And the evidence of that is that this semi-arid region along the coast of Southern California is the 11th largest economy of the world. And so it says a lot to our stature that we have, I believe, in California water, on a square footage basis, you have the smartest people of almost any governmental bureaucracy that you could name in the United States. We just have a lot of really smart people.
And passionate. I've never met a more passionate community of professionals than in water. People just love it. And I think it's because it has a wonderful purpose behind it. And so when you have purpose behind what you do, you just bring your all every single day and put yourself out there and work so hard because, again, I always like to remind everyone, my board, the people that work here, like we're serving the community, a vital resource that everyone needs. And what could be more important than that you go to work every day with that purpose behind you. So I agree that the people are just brilliant and so committed to what we're doing. It's very inspiring. It doesn't make it seem like work at all.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, last question. You've had this really storied career that traverses amazing different things that you've done. And I don't know that I've ever met anyone as high up in water coming from a communications background. I think that's just fantastic. And I think that is the missing element in what we do, is that we need to be better storytellers. We need to get out there. We need to be visible. We need to tell people why what we do matters. So that's awesome. So in this very, impressive and I would think fundamentally fulfilling career that you've had, what's a watershed moment that sticks with you in your career?
I think the most formative part of my career was being trusted with being assistant general manager of Weston Central Basin Municipal Water District. And my boss, many in the water industry know her. Her name is Virginia Grebian. She ended her career as one of the top executives at Parsons Engineering. And I was brand new to water. I had been there only 3 years. I didn't know much about the politics of water or anything. This is over 30 years ago. And she had a difficult pregnancy. And she had to take leave and she needed to appoint an assistant general manager. And there were 2 engineers that I was campaigning for, but she chose me.
Wow.
And the reason she chose me was because she said that she felt I could manage the board. And, I thought she gave me too much credit at the time. If those 2 engineers hadn't been there, it would have been awful. But I think at the end of the day, I was able to prove to myself that I was adept at managing boards. And I'm very proud that at least in my first term at Metropolitan as chair, the board has really rallied together and has become a very stable force within the Metropolitan family, which it hadn't been in the years leading up to my coming into office. And so I believe that that was a pivotal moment. It gave me the self-confidence to do what I'm doing now.
That is an awesome story. And I totally feel you on that. When the board appointed me to be the general manager of San Bernardino Valley Municipal, there was kind of a shock that rippled through the watershed because, traditionally general managers are either engineers or lawyers. And I was an endangered species biologist, not even in management. And the trust that they gave me was, a real honor. But I do believe that your story and my story and a few others that I know of, it talks to the importance of having diversity of backgrounds and experiences and viewpoints within our workforce. Because I think one thing that you and I both bring to the table in a lot of these big conversations is just a different viewpoint. We come from different backgrounds. We don't believe that, everything's going to go according to the planned documents or the argument that we've made, or, we're dealing with people. And so I think that that is such an important, relevant point to, I guess, all the other water agencies in California that you can choose the unlikely or unobvious person out there and it will work out. Like they bring something to the conversation that is important. And so I had never heard that before. I love that story. Thank you for
Heather,
sharing.
in this age where it's dangerous to talk about DEI, I say it kind of whispering. I think the burden is on us to talk about the other side of it. And the other side of it has to do with personal courage, and the willingness and ability to put yourself in a situation where you are the unusual suspect, but you're there with the value proposition about what you bring to the table and what skills can benefit everybody. And I think that speaks to the content of character that Luther King and even President Trump have talked about. That if you're willing to take a risk and put yourself out there in a place where you might not be the typical candidate, the usual suspect, and you succeed, you can also then garner the rewards.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adán, for spending an hour with us. I really appreciate your time and your perspective. And I hope you had fun talking about California water, but I really appreciate the service that you give to the public and California water community.
And as I've expressed, I feel the same about you and your board and all the great stuff you're doing out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adán. Take care.
Later.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in to San Bernardino Valley Presents Watershed Moments. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Adán Ortega. I know I loved some of the stories that he told and just getting a little bit more insight into the California water community. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. And always remember that really hard is not equal to impossible. Until next time.